gives me real great pleasure to introduce our second speaker for this session, Professor Jeroen van der Laak. I've actually known Jeroen now, I think, for about 9 years. I remember I was at a meeting in the Netherlands when the volcano eruption happened and got stuck. Jeroen was kind enough to invite me to Radboud, to Nijmegen, and so we got to connect then. And ever since, I think we've followed each other's work. But Jeroen really has been sort of really blazing a trail in applying AI for digital pathology. He has an outstanding group at Radboud University in Nijmegen. The previous speaker spoke about some of Jeroen's accomplishments. In particular, the Chameleon challenge, of course, has garnered a great deal of interest, resulting in a very high-profile JAMA publication from a couple of years ago. One of my reservations when Nasir asked me to moderate the session was I knew I was going to be terribly jet-lagged. And given that this was in the afternoon, I was a little wary about my sort of post-lunch coma kicking in. But when I realized that I was going to be introducing Jeroen, I accepted it because I realized that Jeroen, having seen him speak before, was going to be the ultimate sort of wake-up pill that I needed, much better than the caffeine. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor van der Laak, who's going to talk about the remarkable potential of deep learning for histopathology. Thanks, Jeroen.
I do feel some pressure now, Anand. Okay, first I would like to thank the organizers, Nasir and David. I think you put together a great program, and I'm very happy that I can show some of the work we do here today. Maybe in line with Manuel, I think it will only take you less than 10 seconds to find out I'm not a pathologist. Actually, I'm a computer scientist by training, which is a long time ago. I was in the pathology department for over 25 years now, but I never really became a pathologist. I also would not consider myself a computational pathologist. And what you can see here on my first slide is the research group that I'm leading today. We have a lot of technical people, and the work we do is mostly on deep learning for histopathology. And we really try to focus a lot on very concrete applications. So we really, what you see in my presentation, we really try to be close to the pathologist. Having been in the pathology department for so long makes me realize very strongly what we need in pathology now. So I think that this is very concrete, practical stuff that we try to develop that can help pathologists today in a very concrete sense. I have to see how to... And I would like to focus today on some breast cancer use cases. Now, as the other speakers, I do have a couple of financial disclosures. We work with a couple of companies. None of these will influence my talk today. And I would like to skip this. So I think if you're in this conference today, you realize that by now we can digitize glass slides and we can make beautiful whole slide images. And if you don't know this, then you should go to one of the vendors downstairs, or to all of them, actually. I think these devices are great. They will really move the field of pathology, and well, I think enough said about that. And the other thing I would not like to mention too much is the basics of deep learning. These three guys did phenomenal work. These are, let's say, the three godfathers of the deep learning as we do that today. I will show you a small example about what deep learning is, but I will not go into all the details. There is a workshop later today if you're really interested in understanding deep learning to a more fundamental level. I will not touch that now because of time. Now, I would like to show you some examples for breast cancer staging, grading, and beyond. So I would like to give you 3 examples, one for staging on lymph nodes, one about grading, mitosis detection, and I would like to show you how we can also leverage deep learning to get information that goes beyond what we do today in pathology practice. Now, to start off with staging, if you're a pathologist, probably even if you're not, you know about cancer staging, you know the TNM staging system. And what you can see in my slide here is this is a lymph node tissue section. And the task for the pathologist here is to find whether there is cancer, whether there is any kind of metastasis in this. And if you're a pathologist, you might already have discovered there is a metastasis. Now, it might be that you need a bit higher magnification to do this, but clearly you can see here there is a group of tumor cells, and so this would be a positive lymph node. Now, we started at some point to look into this using machine learning, using deep learning, because the pathologists that we talked to would always tell us, lymph node metastasis detection is a task that pathologists have to do. They have to do it quite often for different types of applications. And actually most pathologists do not like it. So we thought this is a very nice task to start automating, because on one hand, it's relevant, a pathologist does not like it, and we think it's feasible by machine learning. So we spent quite some research on finding these metastatic groups of tumor cells in lymph nodes. And maybe to remind you the value of finding a tumor in lymph node, this is a very large study on 173,000 patients even, in which you can see that an N0, so it means no metastasis in lymph nodes, has actually a very good prognosis. So it's a survival, in this case, HS survival of 100%. Whereas if you have an N3, which means there is quite some metastatic burden, then you can see that the survival drops to as low as 60%. So this is clinically, it's a very relevant task. Now, what we did, and it was mentioned before, we organized two challenges, competitions, in which we invited researchers in machine learning to help us solve this problem. So we tried it ourselves, and we saw that deep learning was actually quite capable of finding these metastatic regions. And then we decided to organize these challenges, in which we offered images to, say, everyone interested, and we asked people to try and solve the problem for us. And just to give you a brief feeling of what it is to be part of this challenge and to organize this kind of a challenge, in the first challenge, Chameleon 16, we had 400 whole slide images. And I'm completely sure, I think 270 or something had tumor, had metastasis. And what we did was we annotated the tumor regions exhaustively, which means that we had people that really drew a line around every bit of tumor. And here you can see, actually, that could be quite a bit of work. To annotate this very carefully can take you even up to a couple of hours. So we meticulously drew these regions as a ground truth. So this is what the people in the challenge, in the contest, in the competition have to find. They have to build an algorithm that can take the whole slide image and can find the tumor. And well, we try to really do this as accurate as possible. Here you can see a nice example. If available in our archive, we would use immunohistochemistry to help the annotations, because it's a lot of work, and sometimes even a pathologist doesn't know, right? Even between pathologists, there can be a bit of discrepancies. Now, I told you I will show you a very brief example of what deep learning is. So in deep learning, what we do is we train a computer by showing it examples. So we do not explicitly train it on, in this case, tumor versus benign tissue. We just train it by showing it examples. In this case, we would take very small image patches, image regions within the annotation, which would be has to be labeled as tumor, and outside of this annotation, which is benign tissue. And now in deep learning, what you would do is you would train a neural network, and you would feed it these images. And during training, what you will do is you feed it an image, and then you know the label of the image, you know what the ground truth is. And during training, you would just see how well the algorithm would, let's say, predict the ground truth. So let's say we put in a tumor sample, and then we feed it through the network, and the network will tell us this is most probably non-tumor, this is benign, which is wrong. Now, in deep learning, the magic is then you can calculate this error, and you can feed back the error in the system, and you can tune the inner state of the system in such a way that next time it sees the same image or similar image, it will do better. So it will learn the different patterns that belong to the different classes. And by training a system on thousands and even millions of these example patches, at some point the system will really be capable of distinguishing between benign and tumor tissue. So that's, let's say, in one extremely short nutshell, this is what we do in deep learning. Now, we did this Chameleon 16 competition, and the results, and Anna already mentioned it briefly, the results were actually very remarkable and even much better than we expected them to be. This is a bit of a complicated graph. I will show you through it. This is an ROC curve of the test set cases in our Chameleon 16 challenge. These are 130 slides, And the task for the contestants here was to give us a score at slide level, whether there was tumor or no tumor in the slide. So it's just a binary classification problem. The slide is tumor, contains tumor or does not contain tumor. We did not look at isolated tumor cells. So this is about micro and macro metastasis. Now, if you look at this graph shows you the sensitivity on the y-axis versus 1 minus specificity. And in this kind of graph, the perfect point would be the point in the top left. Then you would have a perfect specificity and perfect sensitivity. Now, the green diamond that you can see in the top left, that's actually the value of one pathologist that we asked to do this task. So we had one pathologist go over 130 slides. And this pathologist, as you can see, had a very high sensitivity of 95% and a very high specificity, which means that she never called a slide tumor if there was no tumor in it, no false positives. Now, the reason that she's not perfectly sensitive is because some of these cases were very tough. And this is an example of a very difficult one that she may have missed. Now, what I didn't tell you is that this one pathologist, she did a very good job, but she did this job without any time limitation. So she spent a lot of time on 130 cases. And we realized doing this study that that was not really a very, let's say, realistic scenario, right? If you're a pathologist, you're working in a routine setting, you don't have all the time in the world for 130 slides. So what we did next in our study, we gave the same 130 slides to 10 more pathologists, but now we put a clock next to them. And we said, we give you 2 hours for 130 cases. Now, one of the biggest criticisms of our study, and I fully agree with that, is that 2 hours for 130 slides was probably too much pressure. So that is just too little time for someone to do the task really well. What you can see is that the sensitivity of these pathologists dropped quite dramatically. You can see the orange circles. And you can see that some of these pathologists even go below 50% sensitivity, which is actually not very good. Now, the good news is the lines in my graph show you the algorithms. And the good thing about these algorithms is they have, let's say, some kind of a parameter that you can tune. So you can make the algorithm more sensitive or less sensitive. The price you pay, of course, is you have less specificity. So if you make it very sensitive, it will pick up every tumor, but it will probably also find false positives. Now, as you can see here, is that the best algorithm in this challenge actually do as well as a pathologist without any time limitation. So pathologists that can really have a, let's say, high magnification study of slides a lot of the time. So very remarkable, and we didn't expect this in this challenge, was that an algorithm is actually pretty much at the level of a pathologist for this specific task. Now, in Chameleon 17, we went one step further, and what we did now was we combined a number of slides, and we asked the people building the algorithms to combine, let's say, the results of 4, 5, 6 slides into what is, let's say, closer to clinical practice. So this is the pathological end stage. And now they had to come up with a score, which is PN0 up to PN2. You can see the definitions here. We also put in isolated tumor cells, which makes life much more difficult, not only for pathologists, but also for an algorithm. And now we gave sets of slides to these participants, and they had to train an algorithm to really be able to try and predict the PN stage. Now, to be able to do this, we had to supply, I think, 1,400 scanned whole slide images. So this is quite a lot of data. And I looked, preparing this talk, I looked at the leaderboard. This challenge is still open, so if you're interested, you can still participate. And what you can see here is that the best scoring algorithm at this point, which is actually quite recent, has a kappa score of 0.957, which means actually that predicting the PN stage can be done by an algorithm at a very high level of accuracy. There's one thing I should warn you about. This is a quadratic weighted kappa, and this kind of kappa can give you a bit, the kappa score seems higher than it would be if it were a linear kappa. So 0.957 feels like there is no improvement possible anymore. That is not the case, especially the isolated tumor cells are missed quite often. Still, I think this shows the potential of this kind of an algorithm for this task. It's really very high level and probably very close to what a pathologist can do on this task. Now, some researchers at Google, they participated in the Chameleon challenge, and at some point they also did a reader study, which you can see here. And they found that if they give this algorithm to pathologists, and they have a pathologist in some kind of a user interface being helped by the algorithm, they found that the pathologist is more accurate while saving 20 to 50% of his time. So this completely underlines, I think, the results that I showed you. A pathologist with this algorithm can really be a better pathologist and a more efficient pathologist. I think there's a big possibilities there. Now, I think what is very clear from this example, and if you look at probably a lot of the talks in this conference, is that deep learning is all about data. You need lots of data to be able to train this kind of a system. The system has to see all kinds of variations of your data to be able to really be robust to this kind of variation. So this is about data, and it's not just about a bit of data, it's about lots of data. Right? You need an awful lot of data to train a system. And one of the biggest pains in computational pathology is it's not about big data, because big data is not so difficult for pathology. If we go down to our archives, we have lots of data. Right? That's not a big challenge. The challenge for pathology is to have labeled big data. So if you want, maybe it's a bit a silly example, but if you want a system that can recognize Scrabble stones, you first need someone to really sort them, to say these are the A's, these are the B's, these are the C's. In pathology, it means that, like I showed you, you have to make these very precise annotations to tell the system this is what tumor is and this is what benign tissue is, before you can train the system to do this task for you. Now, the next example I would like to show you is about breast cancer grading. And in this case, you probably know breast cancer grading consists of 3 components. And we focus now on the third one, which is finding mitotic figures and counting mitotic figures. And as you probably know, if you're doing breast cancer diagnostics, you have to first find the hotspot region, so the region which has the highest density of mitotic figures. And then within that region, which should be 2 square millimeters, you have to count the actual mitotic figures. And then if it's below 7 or below 0 to 7, you give it a score 1. If it's between 8 and 12, you give it a score 2, etc. Now, we tried, and we are not the only ones, quite some researchers have done this, we tried to build a deep learning system that can find these mitotic figures. To be able to do so, we need labeled data, right? We need lots of data. We have to show the system a lot of mitotic figures before it can really learn the pattern of a mitotic figure. And to get to this, okay, so here you can see some example mitotic figures. Now, to be able to build a system that can find mitosis in H&E, we needed a training set. And there is quite some previous work in which they asked pathologists to really click on mitotic figures. Now, the problem there is, one, you get quite a low number because it takes a lot of time to click on mitosis. And the second problem is, if you ask 3 pathologists to do this, you will get 3 quite different sets of mitotic figures because they do not agree on every single cell. So what we did instead to, let's say, on one hand, scale up and also to have, let's say, a more robust ground truth, we decided to go for an immunohistochemical marker, which is phosphorylated histone H3. So what we did was we stained the section by H&E, we scanned it, then we destained and we stained for this immune marker. And by doing so, and then we registered the sections. So now we can have, let's say, your ground truth in immunohistochemistry. And what you can see now on the left is we have the immunohistochemical slide. Now we can easily train a network, a deep learning system, to find mitotic figures because they're very trivial, they are brown. And next we can register, we can put on top of each other these 2 images, and we can transfer the ground truth to the H&E section. By doing this for, I think, 20 to 30 tissue sections of triple-negative breast cancers, we had tens of thousands of mitotic figures. Because they are triple negatives, they have lots of mitotic activity. And even they have a lot of atypic mitosis. So you get a whole range of different mitotic figures. Now, what we did next was, so now we have a ground truth of tens of thousands of mitotic figures in H&E by doing this, let's say, this analysis routine. Now, what we did was to train a network is first we did a uniform sampling, which means we took the ground truth mitosis as detected by the network. But of course, in deep learning, you need to have different classes. So in this case, the negative class, the non-mitotic class, was just random sampling. And then we trained a network on being able to distinguish between these 2. Now, the problem here is that if you do this, you have mitotic figures on one hand, and you have random patches on the other hand. And what happens is that every cell that looks a bit like mitosis but is not, looks more like your mitotic class than like the random sampling class. So it means that the system will have lots of false positives because it has learned things that completely do not look like a mitosis versus things that are a mitosis. So everything that looks a bit like a mitosis will fall in the mitotic figure class. So what we did was a technique that is called hard negative mining. We used the CNN to sample now the difficult negative ones. So on one hand we took again the ground truth positive ones, but now the negative ones were actually obtained by using the CNN that we trained in the first pass. And now we have a lot of negatives that actually resemble a mitosis. And on the basis of these data, what we did was we trained not one network, but we trained a whole ensemble of networks. And this is a well-known technique that can help you to have stronger classifiers by not training one network, but training many networks on different data sets, for instance. You can have an ensemble that works much better. Now, the problem with this ensemble, of course, is instead of having one network to run on your image, you need to run, in this case, 10 networks, which takes a lot of time. So to bring back the ensemble to something that is really usable in practice, we did what is called distillation, which means that you can train a new network on the output of the ensemble. And now you have, again, one single network, but it has the power of the ensemble of 10 networks. Might sound a bit technical, but actually it's very doable and it's well-known technology. Okay, how could we apply this? Now, here you can see another breast cancer case. And now what we can do is we can just run the algorithm on the entire slide. It takes 10 to 15 minutes to find every mitotic figure in the entire slide. And next what we can do, of course, we can look for the mitotic hotspot automatically because the computer can find every mitotic figure. What we can easily do now is we can just go with a 2 square millimeter circle over the image and just find which region contains the highest density of mitotic figures. And in this case, it found a mitotic hotspot in the center. And actually, if you look at the mitotic figures it found 5. You can see that it really did a very good job here. Now, you can imagine that this is a very good way of doing this because also finding the mitotic hotspot, which is for pathologists, is actually a very difficult thing. It's not really reproducible because you have to do it, let's say, at a lower magnification than that you can see the individual mitotic figures. Actually, the computer can now really use every individual mitotic figure to define the mitotic hotspot. Now, we took this further, and what we did was we did a small reader study on 90 cases. So we took 90 cases from our archives that were originally scored for mitotic score as 30 cases, mitotic score 1, 30 cases 2, and 30 cases 3. And we used our method to find the mitotic hotspot and count the number of mitoses. We also had 2 pathologists, and these pathologists did 2 things. They first took the glass slide and did the scoring, the mitosis scoring, just like they are used to. Just glass slide, finding the mitotic hotspot themselves, and counting mitoses. Then the next thing we did was we asked the pathologists to take the hotspot of the computer without the, let's say, the green dots. So the computer would not tell them which are the mitotic figures, but the computer would tell them this is the region that you should use for counting. And the pathologists would count mitosis in that region. So they would count mitosis in the region that the computer supplied to them. Now here you can see one nice example. You can see the green circles show the mitoses that were identified by the computer. And actually in this one example case, one of the pathologists found one more mitosis that was missed by the algorithm, but also he found one false positive that the algorithm thought was a mitosis, and the pathologist disagreed with that. So, well, for this case, in the end, they ended up with the same number, just there was one, let's say, one shift. Now, if we look at the numbers for this study, you can see the ICC, which is a measure for concordance between 2 readers. What you can see is if we compare the 2 pathologists on glass slides, you can see a very high ICC. 0.84 is actually a very good ICC. It means that really on a numerical level, they are very close to each other. If you look at the 2 pathologists compared to each other on the computer-defined hotspots, they even do a bit better. So if the computer finds this region, they do a bit better. I would have expected this even to be better because now they are forced to look at the same region, but it's very comparable. Now, if you look at the pathologists versus the the pathologist glass versus hotspot, that's still a very high ICC. So whether the pathologist counts themselves on glass or they go to a digital screen, actually that doesn't make a big difference. And if we compare the pathologist to the AI system, you can see the same kind of concordances. And you can see that a pathologist hotspot, counting in a hotspot for us, AI is actually a higher ICC. So what this shows us is that having a computer do the entire thing, finding the hotspot and counting mitosis, pretty much gives you the same kind of concordance, discordance as going from one pathologist to another pathologist on a glass slide. So I think this is a, let's say, a first study, but I think this really shows that probably a computer could, in many cases, just be as good as a pathologist in counting mitosis. And of course, you don't have to completely leave it up to the computer. You can have, let's say, this kind of a display, and then ask a pathologist to review the mitotic figures. Okay, I realize I have to start rounding off. So I will skip some of my slides. Actually, I had another example that I will not show you today. If you're interested, you can always address me later. Actually, this was the coolest one, but time doesn't permit me to show you this. And I would like to round off. So if you're interested in this work, actually there is a poster by a PhD student of mine, Mashenka Balkahol. She will present it this Saturday, but it will be up for display the entire week, or let's say next coming days. And this will show you more results on the study I just showed you. So if you're interested in possibilities of a computer really counting mitosis and doing the mitotic scoring, then this is a great study that shows a lot of these results. As all the other speakers, I have a lot of people to thank, all our collaborators, and I have a lot of people that pay for our research that well, should be mentioned, of course, and should be thanked. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Fantastic talk. I was absolutely right, Jeroen. You woke me up. So just a couple of questions for our speaker. Well, maybe I'll just kick things off. So, Jeroen, this morning was a little bit of discussion around deep learning and sensitivity of approaches to pre-analytics. Could you speak to that a little bit? How do these approaches sort of stand up to variations on account of different slide scanners, pre-analytic variations? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I showed you my research group, and so quite a lot of the developments we do is really on, let's say, developing these algorithms, which look fancy for this kind of presentation. Actually, I think 50% of the work we do is actually on trying to build algorithms and make them more robust for variations. So we do a lot of research on what we call stain augmentation. So what we can do is we can take slides from one lab and then artificially change, let's say, the color or make them a bit more blurry, a bit sharper, but especially color variations. We can artificially introduce them into our slides. And by using that to train the networks, you can make them much more robust for all kinds of variations. I say the opposite of that is stain normalization. So what we can also do is we can take slides from an unknown lab and make them look like slides in our own lab. And we have seen a couple of nice examples of cycle GANs, for instance, this morning that can really be helpful for that. But there is a lot of research needed, and I fully agree that this is it's a big field. It's not really difficult to just take a small image set, take deep learning and have nice results. That is not so difficult. To build a system that can be robust to different situations and that you can, let's say, guarantee to work in under a certain range of conditions, I think that's the tricky part, and that is what we spend a lot of our research on. Yeah, very good point.
Again, an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I'd be interested in knowing how your system may take into account the background that you get, say, for example, in melanomas and in heavily pigmented tumors where you have perhaps the background and distraction where the computer may analyze figures within the melanocytic or the neoplastic melanocytes and therefore count, have false positives or negatives within such tumors.
That's actually the question you were not allowed to ask, but now I have to be fair. Actually, what we found was that our algorithm completely goes crazy in breast cancer on ink. So if there is black ink on the outside, then it finds huge amount of mitosis. So what we had to do here is we ran the algorithm, and in general it worked quite well. But I think, and actually Mashenka sitting here, she did the analysis. I think in 1/3 or even 50% of the cases, if there was ink, we had to, let's say, manually delineate the tumor region. So that's actually a very good question. The answer to that would be we have to, so the reason that this happens is that in our training data, we didn't have any ink. So we used this system, and for some reason the ink was just not there. I'm not sure why. The solution will be, I'm not sure if that's a complete solution, but the solution will be we have to enrich our training data, the negative class, for lots of ink or melanocytic pigment or whatever things we don't want to recognize. At the same time, I think if you as a pathologist are capable of seeing the difference between melanocytic pigment and mitosis, we should be able to train the system to do so as well. But it's a very good question. It actually just shows how difficult it can be to translate what we build in the lab to a real clinical situation. It's, yeah, thanks.